Good morning, everyone, and happy Sunday. Today I'm continuing my talk that got also had some technical issues a couple weeks ago. And I do sincerely apologize for not being with you 2 weeks ago. We had the fortune to hang out with our really good friends. Their daughter graduated from the Evergreen State College, and we were out on the edge of the continent in Nia Bay in the Olympic Peninsula. So I apologize for not being present to complete this presentation. I hope to do that today. I want to give specific thanks to Chris Milton and Larry Miller for providing me some very great commentary and encouragement to help me continue thinking about this deeply sensitive topic, freedom and slavery. And I hope that with the presentation that preceded mine with Bill's really wise words, he was able to help empty your mind, and I hope with that, with an open heart, you will sincerely hear my thoughts on this subject as I continue them. The Great Commonwealth of Peace and Prosperity. That was a text of Confucian knowledge that we were tested on almost 5 years ago, back in June of 2005. I'm sorry, not 5, 9 years ago. It seems incredible. We're almost coming up on our 10th year anniversary of that amazing, frankly, life-changing trip. And that particular passage that we memorized as part of the Great Scholar Examination begins, when the great spiritual path, the Tao, is practiced, everything is public. I greatly believe that, and I also was very much encouraged to take down some of my thoughts during that trip. And those thoughts you'll be able to find online on the Taoism.net website. If you go to the Iguan Tao section of the site, scroll down, and you'll see a paper of mine that I wrote back at the time. So I'm just going to repeat some words that were interesting to go back to and read again as I was preparing this presentation. And forgive me as I scroll through them. The most important lesson I took away from our participation in the Great Scholar Examination were the feelings of community, of a great multitude of people getting together and getting along. And even in uncomfortable conditions, the climate, we were able to learn from each other and from one another. I learned that seemingly unending hospitality and generosity of the people of Taiwan. I learned that kindness knows no barriers in language. It's just one means of communicating. And I also learned that humans are capable of almost anything, of building great monuments and organizing huge rituals. But in the end, it is our karmic affinity that brings us together. And with that in mind, I hope our karmic affinity can help us understand this topic as I continue to explore it. I think where I left off and where the communication fell off last time is around this slide. An ancient brutality. When the Civil Rights Act, which we're celebrating 50 years of passage this year, was passed, President Lyndon Johnson gave a historic civil rights speech. And in that speech, he said, "Negro poverty is not white poverty. Many of its causes and many of its cures are the same, but there are differences, deep, corrosive, obstinate differences, radiating painful roots into the community and into the family and the nature of the individual. These differences are not racial differences. They are solely and simply the consequences of ancient brutality, past injustice, and present prejudice." I like this cartoon because I think it greatly illustrates a concise history of black and white relations in the U.S. And in case you're too far away to read it from your screen, I'll read it for you. The first panel, a young gentleman with a shackle and a ball around his arms is being piggybacked on by another white gentleman. He says, "This is for your own good." And he proceeds to get himself up onto this ledge, saying, "Get off of me." Meanwhile, this guy that was oppressed gets his chains rid of. And at the end it says, "Well, swell, can you give me a hand up, will ya?" Of course not. That would be reverse racism. Look, if I got up here by myself, why can't you? I think that illustrates it perfectly. That gentleman there needs a box to be able to get elevated to the position that the white gentleman is. I very much feel that all the time in my life. And race and class are so interconnected. I definitely will have other presentations where I discuss class specifically. But here we're talking about race. and the deep injustices and scars that this history of slavery has left on our nation. I had explained to you some of the passages from this groundbreaking work by Ta-Nehisi Coates on the case for making reparations. And the definition of reparations, I think, is interesting to recall. It is the making of amends for wrong or injury done, a reparation for injustice. Being in Taiwan in that great multitude of Tao cultivators, 50,000 plus, in fact, people that were aligned on the same path, trying to change themselves and change the world, I really just felt that that was a goal of ours, of mine, to understand the truth, to unlearn things that were in the way, and to really look personally and frankly, not only within myself at the truth, but the truth of our existence and our reality. I think only through that can we really stand a chance to accomplish the great society, this utopia that even in Confucius' time was very much understood what it meant to be, what that goal was. We talked about this gentleman who said some very racist things, and in his apology of sorts, he was basically saying, well, you shouldn't be offended, and if you are, then Martin Luther King hasn't done his job. We need to get over this prejudice stuff. I disagree with you on so many fronts, but on that one, I can't agree more completely. We need to get over this prejudice stuff. Like the clutter that Bill was talking about that fills our homes and our lives, we must begin to unclutter our psyche of prejudices. They are of no use. We need to get rid of them. And only by that can we as a society move forward in providing justice for everyone. How can you do that? Well, on an individual level, I think part of it is just to open your eyes and to hear and listen to the truth of what has happened and the truth of what continues. In that respect, as a cultivation of your individual self, you can begin to make a difference. And I think if you have a few minutes, these are some recommendations that in the research and preparation for this presentation really helped me a lot personally. I had begun to talk about the really terrible conditions that are going on in Qatar in preparation for the World Cup of 2020. And this excellent documentary on ESPN is a great way to start to understand what that current situation is. Speaking of the World Cup and Mexico playing right now with Frank out there watching in the living room, I think it's important for us to really understand both the joy and celebration and the hardship that people can experience to bring us these worldwide sporting events. So this is a 17-minute video. I think it's an easy thing for you to wrap your head around, get introduced into beginning to think about injustice around the world that currently exists. Also, I talked about the Atlantic cover story from June, 15,000 plus words. I'm not sure how fast you read, but it took me a couple days of sessions of reading it. It is a very powerful case to really help us to understand what the implications of all of this hate and all, frankly, the things that brought our country into existence have brought for us now. And also even more powerful, if you have over 2 hours, I suggest renting 12 Years a Slave. It's an incredible movie and very much deserved all of the accolades and Oscars it won this current year. So I think that's one way to start the conversation, just to let's see what we can do about changing the world here. Two other really important films that recently came out, or rather TV experiences that really affected me recently. Freedom Riders, an American Experience PBS documentary. Incredible firsthand footage of what it took for not just African Americans, but people in solidarity with them to really start changing the laws, even though the laws had been changed legally on paper in society. They really had to take some courageous folks to really make those changes stick. And also, interestingly, since I love food, you know that, Anthony Bourdain has a show on CNN called Parts Unknown. And a recent episode, he visited the Mississippi Delta. So complicated and so interesting, and amazing food and amazing music. And at the end of this episode, he said, "For Mississippi, the past is right there to see, still present, and coming to terms with it is not an abstract discussion, but the daily business of life." And what is the Tao if not the daily business of life, and how you walk this walk, and how you walk this path? In rounding out my presentation here, I'd like to remember one of the many amazing quotes of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the namesake of my alma mater elementary school, if you can remember. And he said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And with that, I'm going to sing you out with the words of my current favorite English pop star, Lily Allen. She has a song out called "It's Hard Out Here," and it's not necessarily safe for work. I recommend you listen to it. It's got a different slant, but there is a chorus, and here it goes. Inequality promises that it's here to stay. We must fight the injustice, 'cause it's not going away. Inequality promises that it's here to stay. We must fight the injustice, 'cause it's not going away. In rounding out my presentation, one more hymnal that really was very powerful in that Freedom Riders documentary. A very powerful hymnal, and I'm only going to speak it because I can't really sing, as you could hear previously. But we shall all be free. The whole wide world, we shall all be free someday. So I leave you this Sunday with my recipe that I learned from my great aunt, Angela, who toiled in the fields and in factories for much of her life to give me the privilege and the opportunity to speak to you. So pinto beans, you'd think it'd be easy to just make beans, and it is, but to make them really great, just fantastic, there are a couple tips and tricks that you need to do to really make them something sublime. So if you take 1 pound of cleaned and rinsed beans, and I highly recommend going to the farmer's market, meeting a farmer, and getting beans that are very fresh. It makes a huge difference in getting some beans that have been sitting on a store shelf for months or even years. So get some nice beans that you know the farmer. Clean them, put them in a large pot, and cover with at least 4 quarts of water, depending on the size of your pot. Add a little bit of salt. Some people say don't add salt, but it really does help to penetrate into the interior of the beans. And as they are cooking, it doesn't really harm them. In fact, it brings them a lot of flavor. So continue to boil those beans. As soon as it comes to a rolling boil, reduce the heat, put a lid on it, and let them simmer, depending on the freshness of your beans, for 30 minutes to an hour. Keep a pot of hot water handy on the side of the stove. You never want to introduce cold water ever into a pot of beans. In addition to taking more time, it also kind of makes them tougher. And keep the lid on as much as possible. No peeking. It does take a little bit of coordination to know when maybe the water has gotten too low. You don't want to burn them. But if you follow these simple tricks, which, like anything, mastery takes a lot of intuition, patience, and trial and error, I think you'll find that you'll have one delicious bowl of beans to fire up for your Independence Day weekend. So with that, I think I'm going to give it back to you, Derek. Thank you everyone so much for listening to my thoughts, and I hope you have a great holiday.